Now, as we've been reporting this morning, the Commonwealth Ombudsman says he's so concerned about the level of self-harm in Australia's immigration detention centres that he's now launching an inquiry into the situation.
Allan Asher says there's been a steep rise in the number of detainees attempting suicide and self-harming. For more, the Ombudsman joins us now from Canberra. Allan Asher, good morning and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Was there one incident, was there a moment, was there a spark where you thought, enough now, I need to have a look at this?
Well, I was at Christmas Island myself in the last week of June, and there were 30 incidents reported that week, and I've since learned that in the first week of July up to 50 incidents from around all the detention centres, and it just tells me that there's something wrong and something needs to be fixed.
Is there a level or a number of incidents that beyond which you would not think it was a problem? Is there a limit or a ceiling on this issue for you?
Well, one of the things that we're planning to look at is the incidence of attempted suicide and self-harm in detention centres compared with the population generally, and that we're wanting to do a science-based and expert-endorsed review so that we can bring the very best science to bear here to see what's going wrong and what can be done about it.
So what form will your review take?
Well, it's essentially by having a group of experts analyse all of the data. We're going to be looking at the demographic composition to look to see whether there are gender issues, whether country of origin, age, just whereabouts the people have come from, their current medical background, how this relates to the sorts of decisions that they're likely to expect from their visa application, all of those. We want to look at current preventative mechanisms, what's been done, what's not been done, and look at best practice from elsewhere and come up with a set of endorsed recommendations to put to the department that we think might reduce this incidence for the future.
Will there be a particular focus on those who are charged with the duty of running these detention centres? And in the case as it is now, it's largely private operators, one company, Serco in particular, that has that job. Will you have a particular focus on those people, who they are, how they're trained?
Well, of course, to look at all of those things, the current mitigation and diversion strategies, that sort of thing. The medical teams, a lot of the medical services are also outsourced, and we've already spent some time speaking to them. So it's to be a look at just all of the current settings and what could be done in a way that might reduce the pressures, might put forward some suggestions, recommendations to the government for fixing the problem.
You say, and you've written in a sort of an editorial piece that you've penned yourself, Ombudsman, that it's your job as Ombudsman to oversight and guide good administrative policy, not to make it. And in saying that there's clearly fundamentally something wrong, it's not your job, you say, to then go and analysing the policy itself. But in reaching a conclusion on that, might you not have to consider that mandatory detention as an essential component of strong border control, and that's principle number one of what the government has in place, that actually might be the thing that is something wrong?
Well, of course, if the science takes you there, then that's where you go. But those detention values also spell out that detention is a last resort, that children shouldn't be kept in detention and in mandatory detention of that sort, and that those values, we think, need to be restated in a way that's clear and gives proper effect to the government's intentions.
Can I just take you back one step, just to clarify what you said
Sure.
there at the beginning of that statement, that if the science takes you there, then is it possible that at the end of this review you could conclude that it is mandatory detention itself, principle number one of the government, that might be the problem?
Well, it's the idea of mandatory detention is a complex issue because it's about all the forms of detention within that. And so if people with pre-existing mental illnesses are kept in circumstances that aggravates that illness, then that's in breach of those values. And so I don't think that's likely. And that for children and unaccompanied minors, for young fisher people, all of those shouldn't be kept in circumstances where they're facing self-harm. And that the duty of care that the Australian community has to all of those who are in immigration detention is such that we think there are ways of managing that doesn't expose them to risk of self-harm or attempted suicide.
We've attempted ourselves to try and speak to the Immigration Minister this morning. He's not available to us, but we've been sent a statement on his behalf, and it includes this observation: the government has worked hard to change the culture of detention. This government certainly came into office saying it was going to do just that. It was going to have a very different approach and a more humane and compassionate approach to asylum seekers. Do you see any evidence of that?
I see lots of evidence of that. I think the government has done an extraordinary amount to try and make the detention system work in a humane and respectful way. But as against that, the very large increase in numbers, especially last year, seemed to have just overwhelmed the administrative capacity and brought tension to every dimension of it. Part of the reason that we're making the statement today is that this is the third anniversary of the publication of those detention values, and we're saying we'd like to see a recommitment to it and a re-grasping of those built into policies that are going to be durable over a couple of years, instead of just ones that respond to the last level of crisis. I'm convinced that the government, and I know the department, really do want things to work. It's our goal to try and show them from an administrative point of view how it can work better.
Allan Asher, you've clearly asserted that when you hear of these incidents of self-harm, you see them as an example of something going wrong. These days, and even going back to the bad old days of lip-stitching and the like under another government, that is often seen by some, and often by some people in government, as simply attention-seeking, as outrageous behaviour by asylum seekers trying to manipulate the system to their own ends. How will you try and counteract that view?
Well, it may be that there's a need for much better information provided to asylum seekers about the management of their claims, about when they might expect to hear things, so that they aren't forced to act in those ways to the extent that that's their motivation. We are looking to find answers, and that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a need to pin blame.
You were talking just before about the administrative capacity to actually deal with the overwhelming numbers of asylum seekers who have turned up in the last 12 to 18 months. Is that going to include a particular focus on whether the government has hired and put in place enough people to speedily process those asylum claims as it initially claimed that it would do when it came to office? It's been put to me by many sources that we simply don't have enough ASIO officers, we don't have enough security officers and the like to screen them quickly as the government said it would for both health and security reasons. Is that going to be a particular focus?
Well, undoubtedly there are going to be dimensions of the problem that are caused by delay, confusion, staff who aren't all that well trained, and that we want to look at those things as well.
Will the issue of detention itself, do you think, come under serious question as a result of your review? If it's bad for these people, younger and older, to be locked up in this way for so long as they have been now, does it not logically follow that that regime, that system itself might have to change after what you discover?
Well, to the extent that the detention, the way people are held, the information that they have, the absence of effective activities that give people a reason to get up in the morning, to the extent that those things are contributing to this, of course we'll point that out and look to the government to do something about that.
Allan Asher, really good to talk to you today. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.